Alrighty, so today we are going to do one of the last emotion index of the regular season. In fact, this is the penultimate emotion index I'm going to do in terms of the regular season, as I'll do one more after decision day is over. But in terms of this emotion index, it's kind of a playoff push edition. This is where every fans are going to feel like their team either have already clinched and ready for playoffs, or they're almost clinched, or they're looking for home field advantage at least for the first round. Then there's are the fans that are trying to hope that their team can hang on if they're like on the playoff bubble, or they're the team that are kind of in the hunt and just below the red line. There's also fans that think that they still have a shot in terms of making the playoffs, but they're kind of on the fringe and that they need a lot that goes their way. And then of course we get the fifth tier, which is teams that have already seen their team getting eliminated already in see you next season mode, or teams that is just about to be eliminated and they're facing the reality that their team is not going to make the playoffs. So it's a relatively easy emotion index to make because of the category, because most of where I put each of these teams are based on where the standings is. In fact, I even have the standings right now on the phone just to kind of use as a bit of a reference guide of where every single team is, because I'm going to mention a lot about the standings throughout this video. But we start off with the first team, and we're going to go alphabetical order as always, and we start with Atlanta United. And for Atlanta, they're on the fringe. I think their fan base can feel that they are still with a fighting chance, and especially that kind of really improved with them getting back-to-back wins, and that they still do have some tough games coming up. I believe they play Philly next, and that's going to be a tough game, even though it is going to be a home game for them. But yeah, there is that belief that a couple of weeks ago it looked like it was doom and gloom, but ever since this back-to-back win, especially that big win against Orlando City, has the fan base feel like maybe they're not done yet. They're still on the fringe. Though again, they have played one more game than Columbus, who they are the last team to make it into the playoffs. As the playoffs started today. And also get used to me saying this a lot, because that is the team that I'll mention a lot that is just above the red line, alongside with Real Salt Lake in the Western Conference, is the seventh place team. And that again, they're only 2 points back, but they do have played more games than Columbus, and that they need to of course not only overtake them, but also hope that Columbus will drop resort. And also the team ahead of them too, Inter Miami, does have the tiebreaker over them. But now moving on to the next team, we got Austin. And Austin, yep, they're already here. And again, for all these teams that have clinched, which I believe right now, I think Austin and LAFC have clinched, which, that's the case. I probably might as well just put them on there. Oh, well, I'll probably do it later on. And then in the Eastern Conference, I think the top three have already clinched into the playoffs. So yeah, they basically belong in this category. They're basically ready for the playoffs. But as I said about Austin, and the concern that I think Austin fans have about their team is the fact that the defense is not good. Like, the defense looked really shaky in these last couple of games. I mean, the attack has still looked pretty good, but it's just all depends on this defense and how they perform, because there's been times, especially in that last game against RSL, if it wasn't for RSL being one of those teams that would kind of toothless going for on the attack, they would have been ripped apart in the first half. And I haven't even got to the point where Austin fans, another thing that they might worry is this team always find themselves going down early in the game, and eventually have to rely on a crazy comeback to get them the resort. But now moving on to Charlotte. And for Charlotte, I would say that, for Charlotte, it still feels like it's like right between where it's a miracle for them to make it, but they're also on the fringe of the playoffs, because I believe right now Charlotte is in 11th place and they're 6 points back of Columbus. But remember, they do play Columbus down the stretch, and actually they are trying to finish that game between the Crew and Charlotte FC, as that was the one game I mentioned before the season that it basically was stopped after 17 minutes because of a weather delay that basically postponed the game. So they do have a chance to catch up Columbus in terms of that spot, but like I said, Charlotte does still have a really tough schedule for the remaining season. I believe they play NYCFC and the Philly Union again, so it's not easy for them to make it to the playoffs. But the fact that they've been showing some fight to be in this spot, as an expansion team, there's got to be a lot of applause for that. And I think whatever happens this season, I think it's considered a success for an expansion team, because again, an expansion team, usually not a lot of them tends to make it to the playoffs in the first season, but the with the season and the term of season that this team has gone through both on and off the pitch, I think their fan base will be happy. The fact that at least they have some good foundation heading into their second season. But now moving on to Chicago, and for the Fire, yep, they're pretty much even below that list. They're pretty much on their way in terms of getting eliminated, and that's even after they got a big victory in their last game against Inter Miami. But you know, the writing was already on the wall for this Fire team. You can't go through a rough patch doing September, where I think they won like only one game out of the last 6, and you expect it to make it to the playoffs. So you know, for the Fire, I think it's going to be a disappointing season for them, because there was a lot of expectation that this team could be ready for the playoffs, and that, again, I think what they need to do this offseason, they need to maybe add some more attacking pieces, because we know this defense is good, and also maybe they need to think about getting a new goalkeeper, because Gaga Slolina is not going to be there next season. But most importantly, I think it's the attack that they need to work out, because this team is one of the lowest goal scoring, if not the lowest goal scoring team in the league this season, and if they could find that goal scored, I think this team could have made it to the playoffs. But now we got FC Cincinnati, and for Cincinnati, yeah, I think they are. I mean, they're still on that part of the standings where they're currently in 6th place, and that they're not totally safe in terms of clinching for the playoffs. But after that 6-0 beatdown that they have against the Quakes, and I'm pretty sure their fan base is over the moon with that result. I think there is a case that Cincinnati can actually do it. Like, again, what this team has done this season is nothing short of amazing, and that if I'm going to do a video talk about some of the most surprising teams this season and some of the most overachieving teams this season, it's got to be FC Cincinnati, because nobody thought that this team was going to be where they are right now. I mean, everybody thought that maybe they're not going to win the wooden spoon, which, you know, they finally didn't do it this year, but nobody thought that they would be that ahead of schedule under Pat Nolan in terms of them being a playoff contender. And right now they look like they could be, again, sitting 3 points above the red line. But again, they just got to make sure they need to finish the job, because again, they're still not that far away in terms of clinching the playoffs. And we know in MLS this season, things can really change in a flash, even if we're down the stretch right now. But now moving to the Colorado Rapids. Yeah, for the Rapids, it's kind of just in that point where, you know, even with that big win that they had against the Quakes, it is still just a miracle for them to, if they can make it. I think right now they are, well, actually, I will say that they're not that far out of the playoffs. They're only 4 points out of it. But the reason why I still put them in there, and I think Rapids fans can agree, they can't win on the road. I mean, you know, when you look at the remaining games of the season, I believe the Rapids, let me take a look here. So the Rapids, they have to go on the road against LA, and they finish the regular season against Austin FC, which, you know, the only thing their hope is Austin will just kind of rest their guys. But against that game against the Galaxy, I think that might be the game that will decide their playoff hope. Like, that might be the game that if they can win that game against the Galaxy, then all of a sudden they could be back into this category. But as of now, I still don't believe this team can get a result on the road, because they have just struggled so much this season on the road, and that I feel like it's still at a point where it's kind of a bit of a miracle if they do make it. But now moving to Columbus, and for Columbus, yeah, they're hanging on, and you know, I'm gonna say the same thing about RSL2 and put them in that same category, because when you're the 7th seed, you are basically hanging on for dear life, and especially with the way that, you know, the Crew, after that big loss against Inter Miami, now all of a sudden they just open the door for a lot of teams below them to try to check them. And that for the Crew, I think their thing that they need to figure it out is that they need to win home games. Like you know, these last couple of games they have almost got resort on the road, but they haven't able to get the job done, and tends to kind of collapse late in the game. I mean, in the last game they gave up a late goal against Inter Miami, and then in the game against Montreal they gave up 2 late goals. And innocent enough that has happened, and that kind of collapse late is not going to get it done if you want to sustain for that spot. But yeah, you know, for the Crew, even though they do have 4 more games left this this season, and that I believe let's take a look here. They have two that is going to be at home, but those two are going to be not easy because they have to play Portland and the Red Bulls. Next two teams that are having a really good season so far, and one team having a rejuvenated season, and the other being very good on the road. And knowing Columbus have been struggling at home this season, yeah, they can definitely find themselves below the red line. They're still kind of just hanging on for dear life and trying to hang on to that 7th spot. But now moving to DC United. Yeah, they're already eliminated, and I don't really need to mention too much about DC because I'm pretty sure their fan base know that this team's been eliminated ever since Hernan Losada basically run this team to the ground, and their interim head coach Chad Ashton doesn't tend to be a much difference, and even getting Wayne Rooney and hope that maybe can provide the start for them to get going. No, it hasn't. It's a long way for them to figure out this offseason. There's a lot of things they need to figure out this offseason because I think for this DC team, it's a very strange kind of team to figure out, and feels like there's a lot of pieces that they need to figure out if they want to be competitive again. But moving on to FC Dallas, and for Dallas, yeah, they're pretty close to clinching. I mean, they are currently in 3rd place right now, and I think it's just going to be a matter of time before they clinch the playoffs. In fact, I think they do win their next game or win one more or draw one more, I think they would clinch the playoffs. And the run that FC Dallas has been run is just incredible. And I think when you look at the West right now, and with the way that the top two seems to falter a little bit and how it's been kind of wide open, I feel like people are underestimating FC Dallas and that they could be a contender in the Western Conference. Now, they will point out that FC Dallas has not been able to get past the second round of the playoffs, but I think this has been a different FC Dallas team, and I think Dallas fans can even agree with the way that this team, on the attack, they look absolutely lethal, and also on the defensive end, they look solid at times, and even having an underrated goalkeeper, Team Pos, to keep those goals out. Again, this is a team that I think if there is one team that is really flying under the radar, it's got to be FC Dallas, because this team can really make some noise and could be an ultimate dark horse heading into the playoffs. Even though I don't want to call them a dark horse because where they are in the standings, I mean, I don't usually call dark horses if they're that high up in the standings. But moving on into the next team, we got Houston, and for the Dynamo, they are basically right here. And again, there's still a lot they need to figure out in the offseason after they, of course, being eliminated a long time ago. In fact, they were one of the first, if not the first team to get eliminated this season in the playoffs. And that, again, just like DC, there's a lot of things that they need to work on. Though, unlike DC, I think they at least have a good enough foundation, and that, this rebuild that they've been going through, I think maybe they don't really need to just completely start from scratch in terms of the rebuild, because again, I think there is some foundation piece, and I'll definitely talk a lot more about it when I do the moving forward series about the Houston Dynamo, and probably will do it soon because they're going to be the first one to do so. But now moving to Sporting KC. Again, for Sporting KC, they haven't been eliminated yet, but they're on that point to do so. But again, at least for Sporting KC, unlike the two other teams I mentioned, DC and Houston, I think this team, out of all the teams that are about to be eliminated, or out of all those bad teams that is near the bottom of the standings, Sporting KC probably have the brightest light heading into next season, because down the stretch you can definitely see that there is that potential that they could get themselves back to where they're supposed to be, which is a contender in the Western Conference. And I've mentioned it many times before, guys like William Agata and Eric Tommy was a difference maker in terms of them getting them in the summer transfer window. And now you add in the pieces like Alan Pulido and Gadi Kina coming back from injury, and all of a sudden this team doesn't look as bad as what we thought that this entire season could be. But now moving to the LA Galaxy, and yeah, for the Galaxy, they're still in the hunt, but their fan base will feel like they're right here. It will be a miracle for them to make it, because it feels like the Galaxy always find ways to not get over the hum, and that you can even say that in some way they're kind of like the New England Revolution of the Western Conference, where for the past couple of weeks they've always are kind of on the fringe of the playoff line. They sometimes find themselves going above it, and then they find themselves below it, and they also find ways to kind of sabotage their way to get above the red line. And these last 3 games, it's a perfect example of that. I mean, those two games where they missed penalty by Chicharito, one with a Panenka in that game against Sporting KC that would have got them 3 points, and then the other game where it could have got an equalizer for them and maybe get the win late in the game. I mean, those are basically 5 points that LA Galaxy have dropped, and those 5 points, if they have it, they would have actually got themselves in 5th and 6th place right now. And yeah, those 5 points, I have a feeling it's going to come back to haunt this team, and especially after just such an uninspiring performance against the Vancouver Whitecaps. Look like they just completely give them up. I don't blame a lot of Galaxy fans feel like that their playoff hopes is all but buried. Even though when you look at the standings, they still control their own destiny, and that I think that's kind of been the theme this season. As bad as the Galaxy has been played, they still somehow control their own destiny in terms of making the playoffs. And if they just can win that one game and that game in hand, they can of course get themselves back in the playoff race. But like I said yesterday in the review, the problem with that game in hand is against the San Jose Earthquakes at Stanford Stadium, which that is basically a house of horror for the Galaxy for many years. And that, again, this is why maybe the fan base don't feel like they have shot of making the playoffs, even though they can win 1 or 2 games down the stretch. These crucial games, they can definitely get themselves above the red line. But now moving to LAFC, and unlike their intercity rival, who is basically thinking whether they can make it to the playoffs or not, LAFC is already in the playoffs. But again, there are that concern with LAFC, and especially, I think they mentioned before for that, I feel like Steve Cherundolo doesn't know what his best starting 11 is going to be, and that is a huge concern if you're an LAFC fan when you see that he can't figure out what's the best starting 11. Because again, this is a team that is clearly, if there is one team that is MLS Cup or bust certified, it's LAFC. Like, if this team does not win MLS Cup this season, it's going to be considered a complete failure. And not to mention, when you look at some of the pieces that they added, and the big concern with now Gareth Bale, just it doesn't seem like he even want to be there most of the time, because he's been having such an awful run for this team ever since he came into his first 2 appearances. And that, yeah, as a result of that, there's a lot of question about this LAFC team, and especially a lot of question on the attack too, because the attack is not as lethal as we've seen in the beginning of the season. And it feels like now we shift the discussion of whether if they can be good in terms of not going down early in the game, to now just a discussion of the same thing we had back in 2021 when they missed the playoffs, where the finishing is a problem, and can they have that one clinical finisher, and can they maybe even get guys like Vela get going, and also maybe Chicho Arango continue to score every single game, like it's something that we have not seen that kind of a player that always been a guaranteed goal scorer every single game, probably since Joseph Martinez did a couple of years ago. But now moving on to Inter Miami. Miami is definitely here. I mean, they are definitely a team that is in the hunt for the playoffs. I mean, that big victory against the Columbus Crew, it's safely say that is definitely the biggest win that they had this season, and that they are now only 1 point or 2 points. Let's see here. They're 2 points below the red line. But my question with Inter Miami, and I'm sure that their fan base will also question about this team: can they get Resort on the road? Like, this is, like, I think in some way maybe I probably should put Miami maybe around here too, and maybe I probably should have put Colorado up here too, where at least it seems like both of these teams are still in the hunt in terms of the playoffs, but both of them doesn't seem like it, because with the way that their road record this season has been bad, that's why they haven't done very well this season or in this playoff hunt. And that, again, for Inter Miami, they need to win those road games, or at least at the very best get those road results, because if they don't get those road results, I don't think they're going to make it. I mean, like I said, I think they have 2 more home games for the remaining of the season, right? Yeah, they do have 2 more home games. Their next 2 on the road is going to be really crucial too, because the next game they got DC on the road and then Toronto FC on the road, and those are definitely winnable road games. But the problem is those two are also games that Well, I will say this, DC, they have really struggled on the road, but Toronto has been one team that they tend to have a good record against them, and that again, I think maybe that's also another reason why I would put Inter Miami a little bit highly rated of them potentially making the playoffs because while we know that they do good on at home, if they can take care of business against road team on the road against teams that are not doing well or have already eliminated from the playoffs, they can definitely go above the red line. But now moving to Montreal, or actually not Montreal. I'm sorry. Let's go to Minnesota United, the Loons. Yeah, the Loons are going to be right here, and I've said it before. This is a team that this team is kind of in a very very interesting situation. I mean, on one hand, they can still get home field advantage in the playoffs, and in some sense, they kind of need to because I don't think this team is going to win a road game in the first round of the playoffs. At least they're not built to do so. But also the fact that this team is still kind of injured to hell, and that when you also look at the remaining schedule they have, I mean, out of all those teams that is in the playoff hunt, I think they probably have the easiest schedule out of it. Anybody. I mean, they got Sporting KC on the road, the San Jose Earthquakes on the road, and then finish the season at home against Vancouver on decision day. The problem is, they have had a lot of trouble playing against Sporting KC, and especially the next game when they don't have Reynoso in that one. I mean, again, that's going to be a little bit tough, and especially with SKC being an informed team, and is the team that you definitely do not want to play against right now out of the bad teams that is in the bottom of the standings. Yeah, I don't have a lot of hope that they can get a result out of that. And then they go on the road against the Quakes. The Quakes is a team that have been playing spoiler lately, and not to mention finish the season at home against Vancouver, where if they don't get those result on the road in the next two games, that Vancouver game all of a sudden could be a playoff this game, and they're going to be in a very interesting kind of situation. So in terms of, like I said about how the interesting situation that they're in, it can really vary in these next three games. In fact, I don't think there is one team that things can really vary in their next three games than the Loons right now, because again, if they can do well in these next couple of games, they can secure a home playoff place. But if they decided to go a typical Minnesota sports tradition, then yeah, they can easily miss out on playoffs. I mean, it feels like there is a high floor, but also a high risk involved in that one, and that it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to look in these next couple of games. But now we go to Montreal, and for Montreal, they are one of those teams that have clinched. So again, like I said, when they already clinched, they of course belong in that top category, and overall, I'm pretty sure Montreal is looking forward to the playoffs. So again, as they head to the playoffs and get a home game, I'm going to be interested to see how they will do, because we've seen before where teams that have made it to the playoffs for the first time and they get a home field advantage, the lack of playoff experience is definitely going to play into the factor. And knowing the fact that Montreal, even though I know they did get that win against Chicago, my concern of their home form is the reason why maybe some might not say that they could go all the way. Maybe that's kind of used as a way to not give Montreal credit of being a contender in the Eastern Conference, because if you look at the Eastern Conference contender, I mean, it's pretty clear that we know who is going to be the heavy contender, which is the Philadelphia Union. But after that, not a lot of people mention Montreal being one of that team, even though they definitely have the strength and power to go head to head with the likes of the Philadelphia Union or even teams that is around them. But the problem is, it hasn't been shown, especially at home, and that's maybe is why, like FC Dallas, are kind of flying under the radar a little bit, but they're not giving enough credit, thinking that I don't think they might get themselves exposed in the playoffs, and that poor home form, and also them not able to get big victory against team around them in the playoff race might be the reason why they get a first round exit and not be a contender. Though that being said, moving on to Nashville. And for Nashville, they're kind of like right here where, Nashville is another team that, like Minnesota, it can really change in a flash. And that, I believe Nashville, do they still have any more road games this season? Let's take a look here. I know they play a lot of home games in the second half of the stretch. Oh yeah, they do. The next road game that they have is against Austin FC. Ooh, that's gonna be a spicy one to consider. But they do finish the season at home against Houston, and then they finish the season on the road against LAFC. So that is not an easy schedule. I mean, besides Houston at home, but knowing Nashville is a team that have struggled this season at home, yeah, that is definitely a really tough schedule. And again, things can definitely change for them. They can definitely get themselves to clinch the playoffs, but they can also find themselves dropping down the standings, because I know right now I think they are right now they're 6 points above the red line. But remember, if the Galaxy does win that game in hand, then it gets a little bit tricky where it's kind of only like 3 points above the red line, and that's not really a big buffer zone for them, but in terms of absolutely guaranteeing themselves in the playoffs. But at least I will say that in their case, they're still sitting pretty comfortable, and that again, if they can get a result, if they can get that win against Houston, I think they're probably wrapped it up. And that game between Nashville or not Nashville, but against Austin and LAFC on the road wouldn't have mattered. And that, I think, the ultimate goal right now, when I look at the standings, I think 49 points might be enough, or even 48 points might be enough to make it to the playoffs this season, with the way that we only have 3 games left in the season. If a lot of these teams can get to 48, and that is the cutoff line, I think that they can of course do it. But again, that's just I'm not a good mathematician in terms of deciding where each team needs to be in terms of minimum to make it to the playoffs. But at least right now, that's what it seems like could be the case. But now moving to the next team. And the next thing we're going to talk about is the New England Revolution, and they're in the same category as the LA Galaxy. I'll just kind of copy and paste what I said about the Galaxy with the refs. This is a team that, there's so many times where they had chances of getting themselves back above the red line, and then they aren't able to do it. And the latest loss against the Houston Dynamo might be the rock bottom point of their season. And that's definitely not a great way to say it when you're in the midst of a playoff hunt and that you could potentially be eliminated. And now, I would say that at least with the Galaxy, they maybe have some chances of making the playoffs because they still control their own destiny. New England doesn't have that luxury. In fact, they have now dropped all the way down to 10th position, and now it's getting to a point where, not only they need to win some of their remaining games, but they've also got to hope those teams above them that also drop points. I mean, again, that's the thing about you being in the when you're in the playoff hunt, where you could be close in the playoff hunt, but if there's teams ahead of you that is also fighting for those same position, you're also better hope that they're also going to drop those points. And in the case of New England, if you look at the remaining schedule that they have, they got Montreal at home, Atlanta at home, and Chicago on the road. So that's a relatively winnable kind of stretch, though. Montreal is definitely going to be a tough one. But that game against Atlanta, oh boy, that you talk about an ultimate playoff 6-pointer. That might be the game that could decide whether one of these teams is gonna make it to the playoffs, and that it could be a case that whoever loses that game most likely is going to get eliminated in terms of the playoff race. But we'll see how that's going to do when that game, of course, turns out. But now next we got the New York Red Bulls. And for the Red Bulls, yep, they are, I believe, the final team that have already clinched here. Or actually, no, I think there's one more team. I forgot to put the Philadelphia Union, which in that case, you know what? I might as well just put the Union here because, we all know that the Union have clinched the playoffs a long time ago, and now they're just kind of fighting for the Supporters Shield race with LAFC also in contention for that. But, for the New York Red Bulls, they are ready for playoffs. And this is also kind of at that point of the season where if you're a Red Bulls fan, you're basically asking yourself, how is the Red Bull going to disappoint me this time in the playoffs? Because it just feels like for the past 13 years when this team have made it to the playoffs and could potentially have the active longest playoff streak in MLS if Seattle doesn't make it, is the fact how is this team going to disappoint me this season. But in some sense, when I look at this Red Bulls team, they could make it deep in the playoffs. I mean, it's kind of also a little bit unknown because, again, especially with the way that I think they're also in that same situation with Montreal, where the home form has not been great this season, and that's why not a lot of people are giving them props of them being an Eastern Conference contender. And also, it doesn't help the fact that they've always find ways to do a that's so Metro kind of moment in the playoffs. That's why even Red Bulls fans don't feel like any happiness and think that this team will go deep into the playoffs. But who knows? I mean, narrative is always going to be changing, and we saw last year what NYCFC is a team that have always choked in the playoffs, and they changed the narrative. Maybe it's time for the other New York team to do so, and they definitely have a talented enough team to do so. But that is if they can put that narrative aside and actually get results, especially at home. But now moving to speaking of NYCFC, NYCFC is pretty close to clinching, and I know it's been a bad run that they've been on, but did that Confidence Cup win that they had last time is the exact moment that they need in terms of turning their season around. Now, I'm not sure is it going to have that immediate effect because, anytime when you win a trophy, it's always going to be tough to try to turn around and perform well again in the weekend's resort. I mean, just as Orlando City in terms of that, but we'll see whether or not if that big win against Atlas of them getting a trophy is going to be a turning point, because with how bad the season has been, especially in these last month or two, they need that big victory might be enough for them to get together and say, hey, we have the talent in this team. We can still pick ourselves up and get themselves in a good playoff position. And not to mention, they need to also remind themselves that they are the champion of MLS, or they're the defending champion, and that they can definitely trying to get themselves back to where they were last season, and that when playoff time begins, they need to remind themselves that they did it last season. Now they just need to do it again this year, which, despite the way I say it, it's not as easy as it sounds to be. But now moving on to Orlando City, and for Orlando, they're now getting to a point where they're trying to hang on and are in the hunt. And again, like what I said about NYCFC, while that big U.S. Open Cup victory maybe could help there in the playoff race, there could be times where it can kind of hurt them with the way that they might have that cup hangover. And it feels like Orlando, for these past two games, they're still suffering from that cup hangover, and they need to get rid of that cup hangover soon, because I'm pretty sure their fans know that if they don't make it to the playoffs, that's going to be an interesting discussion to Orlando City fans. If they miss the playoffs this season, but they won their first trophy in their franchise history, is it still considered a successful full season? I mean, I think that's going to be a very divisive kind of answer, but obviously, I'm pretty sure their fans don't want that to be the question. They want to make it to the playoffs, and they've been in the playoff position for a long time this season. They do not want to fall into the same trap that the Galaxy was last season, where they were in the playoffs for a long time and then dropped out on the final day, and where they are in the standings right now in 5th place in the Eastern Conference, and they are only 3 points 3 points above the red line. There is that possibility that they could still find themselves fall below the red line if they don't pick it up. I mean, that loss against Atlanta, it definitely hurts in a way where it's not only they lost to a rival, but also the fact that they had a chance to kill them off. Like, they had a chance to end their playoff hope, and now all of a sudden they just helped their rival by getting their playoff hopes alive and potentially coming after them in terms of going above the red line, and they find themselves dropping below the red line. But now moving on to the Philadelphia Union. Oh, I already put the Union, so let's skip to the next team, the Portland Timbers. The Timbers are right here where, again, I wouldn't say that they're trying to hang on in some ways, but they're kind of getting to, or actually, you know what? Let me just change this. I'm going to put them up here where, I don't think they're really just kind of trying to hang on, because the Timbers have been an incredible run of form ever since they won the Cascadia Derby, which that should be to no one's surprise. But it's getting to a point where I think Timbers fans are thinking that, with this usual good run that they've been on in the second half of the season, there's a chance that they can actually clinch playoff, not only playoff, but also potentially clinch home field advantage. I mean, after all, they're only 1 point from fourth position, and that there's a lot of these teams between fourth all the way down to seventh place that are chasing for those home field playoff positions. So there could be a chance that the Timbers can do so, and that is if they can continue that good run of form, because I think they do have some interesting opponent that they're about to face. I mean, going to Columbus on the road against a Crew team that are also trying to battle for their playoff life, it is going to be a tough resort, and then playing at LAFC at home, that could be a big showdown. And then the final game of the season against RSL, if that is the game, maybe there's going to be playoff line that could be at stake. And in case if the Timbers doesn't start to drop on their form, that could be a game that could really decide who could make the playoffs or not. So yeah, the Timbers, again, I think them alongside with Nashville and Minnesota, that it can definitely go either way, but at least in the case of Nashville and Minnesota, where things have been kind of weird, at least they're in a upward projectile in terms of their form, and that's why they can use that as a way to believe that they could potentially get themselves in that home playoff position. But now moving to RSL. Yeah, for RSL, they are just trying to hang on. I mean, it has not been a great run of form in these last couple of games, and that, again, last night, resort against Austin definitely took a huge blow to their playoff chances. And again, I just don't understand what was Pablo Mastroeni thinking of putting a B team in that game against Austin. Like, again, I don't like the fact that this is the tactics that he's going to use, or this is the strategy with the way that they're putting their eggs in all in one basket in terms of getting win at home, because at home this season, at least in these last couple of games, they have dropped points at home this season, and that's why they're getting into this particular situation where they're just above the red line, and there are a lot of teams below them that are hungry to get that spot. And not to mention, as I said about the Galaxy, they actually don't control their own destiny. Like, the Galaxy still control their own playoff destiny right now. They do have that game in hand, and that if the Galaxy does win that game in hand and RSL don't, even if RSL win, the Galaxy will overtake RSL and have that tiebreaker on wins. So again, for RSL, they better hope that their strategy of punting the game away on Wednesday is going to be a way for them to maybe get 3 points over this weekend, because you got to say this weekend, where who do they play this weekend? Let me take a look. They play Cincinnati at home. That's not going to be an easy game. They need to win that. That is an absolute must win, because if they don't win that one, oh boy, all of a sudden things can then things can start to be a little bit dire for this team. And it feels like it's almost like last season all over again, where remember how last season down the stretch they were really dropping down, and it looked like they were all but dead in terms of making the playoffs. Well, they're better pray that they're gonna have like another Damir Kreilach kind of moment, and that is they need to have a Damir Kreilach moment without Damir Kreilach even being on this team, because he's been pretty much out for most, if not all, this season so far. But now moving to the next team, the San Jose Earthquakes. Yeah, I don't need to say much about the Quakes. They are already eliminated. They've been eliminated since day number 1, and let's just move on to the next team. Seattle. For the Sounders, yeah, they're in the hunt. Again, you just can't count out the Sounders. And I know some Sounders fans might say that this might be it. This might be finally the season where they miss the playoffs. But, no, there's a reason why some optimistic Sounders fans will never believe that. And even as an MLS fan, or even just a neutral fan, I would never believe the Seattle Sounders is going to get eliminated from the playoffs until they're officially mathematically eliminated. Because, again, this team, they just, it looked like they were doom and gloom a couple of weeks ago, but there's just something about the magic of the Sounders, and there's just always some ways that Brian Schmetzer can rally this team, even in the worst of times, and somehow get themselves back into a playoff race. And it seems like that is exactly what they are. I mean, still, when you look at the map, it doesn't really kind of favor them a bit, but it doesn't favor them because they're still 4 points below the red line, but they do have a game in hand over RSL, and pretty much a game in hand over a lot of team above them, except for the LA Galaxy. And knowing the fact that the Galaxy have been struggling lately, I wouldn't bet that they might leapfrog them into that 8th spot, and now they put a lot of pressure on RSL in terms of that 7 elusive spot, or even teams that are just above the red line right now. So yeah, again, I refuse to believe that this is a team that's going to be eliminated, and that I think all of a sudden the Sounders team have found some new life. Though again, you know, the remaining part of the schedule is not going to be easy. They play Vancouver on the road. That's not going to be easy because the Whitecaps are also trying to stay alive in terms of their playoff home. Then they got Cincinnati at home, Sporting KC on the road, and then play against the Quakes on decision day. So, you know, it's not going to be easy for them still to make it to the playoffs, but I would definitely not bet against the Sounders to not make the playoffs. I think their playoff hope is now all of a sudden wide open again, when it looked like it was all but shut a couple of weeks ago, and that, yeah, I think they're in a really good position right now, even if they are still below the red line. But now moving to Toronto FC. Yeah, for TFC, they're kind of right here where, you know, their playoff hope was pretty much all but dead after that game against Atlanta United, and I'm pretty sure every TFC fans would say that that's the case. And really, when I do the moving forward series of TFC, it's pretty easy of what I'm gonna say in terms of the disappointment part of the video, or kind of the lowlights part of the video. And by the way, that's kind of a little bit spoiler that I am actually doing the moving forward series a little bit different than I've done in the past, and that obvious disappointment is the defense. I mean, it's not even a big surprise, because I knew that the defense was kind of holding back. You know, I mentioned it many times before about this team. They can sign some of the best attacking player on this team. They can have the likes of Bernardeschi and Insigne looking good coming into the league, and they definitely have done so. But as long as you have that same defense, and you still have that questionable goalkeeping in Alex Bono and Westbrook, neither of them have looked very good, this team is not going to make the playoffs. And it is not a big surprise that the main culprit of why TFC is probably not going to make the playoffs and unable to make that late playoff push is because their defense basically let them down. But now moving to Vancouver. Yeah, I think the Whitecaps are still on the fringe. I mean, I know they still are about 6 points below the red line, and keep in mind they don't have that game in hand like the Galaxy and the Seattle Sounders ahead. But hey, they're still not giving up just yet, and especially if they can continue to win those home games, they can definitely get themselves a chance, especially that next game against Seattle. You can say that might be a must-win game for them if they want to overtake some of the teams that is ahead of them. But like I said, it's still a bit of a miracle for this team to make it, and especially their remaining schedule is not going to be easy too, because besides playing Seattle, they got Austin at home, and they have to go on the road against Minnesota. And in case if they do somehow find themselves in a very good position on the final day, and they have to play against the Loons on the road, again, that's another game that could be a playoff decider, depending on how things could end up in these next couple of weeks. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for the Emotion Index, the playoff push edition. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of this video, and as always, did I maybe rank some of your favorite team a little bit too high or a little bit too low in terms of the Emotion Index playoff edition? But either way, or not playoff edition, but playoff push edition. Want to make sure I get that the right name, because there is a playoff edition for the Emotion Index. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.